once again, and happy Sabbath to everybody. We're down to lesson 9. How quickly time flies. How quickly time flies. And the topic of our lesson this week is education, the church and education, the church and education. And we're going to go into this study tonight. But before we go into the study, can anyone tell us, Elder Parker, you're there?
Yes, I'm here.
Could you bring us our memory text for the week?
Memory text for this week?
Yes, this week.
Lesson 9.
Yes.
Turning, it says, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ, but we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you, and not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you have become dear to us. 1 Thessalonians 2:6-8.
Okay, so that's our memory text, and that's a pretty long memory text. You know, back in the day, we would have to learn that, but tonight we're reading it. And so, anybody want to give me an overview, their understanding of what the lesson meant for them this week? To me, it was a very interesting lesson. It touched some areas that I want to spend some time with this evening, and I hope we are seeing the same things. But you can just share with me as we go into our lesson what you, as an individual, learned from the lesson this week. What you learned from the lesson this week. Anyone can be the first to indicate what you learned from the lesson this week.
Well, good night. I learned that we must love as Christ loved and treat our brothers and sisters the way Christ treated us and also them.
Okay, that's one of the high points. Okay, just to say, Sister Christine, that was my high point of the lesson too. And it took me back to a lesson from last quarter, which says that we need to see people through as Jesus sees them, and or Christ sees them. So that was my high point. But the other high points in the lesson, anybody else want to share?
Yes, it was from Tuesday's lesson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you.
Yes, that we have to take the responsibility of training others, whether it be new members or old members. If we must approach it with seriousness. It's not a light matter, and we have to be tolerant and patient, understanding that everybody does not learn at the same pace. And it's like having a child. When you have a child and you're rearing the child has to go through different stages. So it is within the church that we have a responsibility to ensure that we work with people along their line of development in terms of spirituality.
Yes,
and it's a lifelong exercise.
I saw that point as well. Another excellent point. What the other points? Anybody else want to share what they learned?
My point is on the Sabbath, and it says that, quotes, there is no dumb question. We must provide within the church a safe environment for each person to grow in grace and in understanding of God and his plan for their lives. So we must be comfortable to ask a question and not afraid to, because we'll be shut down, or persons will think, what sort of stupid question is that? So we should have that safety, or what I should say, we should be comfortable that if I ask a question and I don't know what it is, that would not be laughed at, or I will looked upon as she don't know that, she's supposed to know that. So that's my high point.
Okay, I saw that as well.
I saw that as well too. Yeah, but Anybody else? Other students in the class, we want to hear from you. We're going to go into the lesson. Elder, we know you're on the board, but you can share too.
That was basically my what jumped out at me also. I mean, we have to create an atmosphere in the church so that individual can hear their views and say how they feel, without being shut down, as the sister said just a while ago. I think that was quite impressive for me.
Okay. Anybody else want to share before we move on into the lesson? Okay, so we'll want to look at Sunday quickly. True Christian education. As you studied the lesson this week, what did you view as true Christian education? I learned something in Sunday's lesson that it's true, but I've never seen it coming from that angle. We're going to discuss this evening, what is true Christian education? Some persons believe it's taking your children to the Seventh-day Adventist institution, and that is good. But what is true Christian education? What really is true Christian education?
This is my
very
view.
interesting what the question that was asked by the rabbi and the response that was given. And I'd love to hear somebody talk to that tonight, because the answer that he gave when he asked the question was, let me see, when does one know that the night is ended and the day has begun, was the question. And he got some answers, but at the end he said, the night has ended and the day has begun when you can look at a face you never before seen and recognize the stranger as a brother or sister. Until that moment, no matter how bright the day, it is still night.
Okay, so you are in my area, sister, my sister, and happy Sabbath. Yes, that question.
Happy Sabbath to everyone.
That question brought out the point I'm looking at. They gave answers, and to me, they were not dissimilar from the answer that the rabbi gave. But he wanted to out a fundamental point, because he basically said, in his response, until you see the face of someone and you recognize this is an unfamiliar face, and you recognize that that person is your brother or sister. What was that answer trying to portray, or the answer trying to instill in the students? So I'm going to ask you about the question, Sister Linda. I'm asking about the class. I know your question, I know the point. I just want to draw it out from the class.
Well, Elder, if I may just add a comment or two here. I think we see in the whole scenario being played out there two very important techniques as to how to teach our people to view and treat people as how Christ treats them. I think that's the high point of the lesson, when we can see everyone as Christ sees them and treat them as Christ treats them, in spite of race, religion, sex, or whatever the thing may be. That is the high point of the lesson, that particular lesson. And so our duty as a church is to teach people how to do that. Now, how did Christ do it? How did that unfold in the narrative? It was through a question and through a story. So Christ used the story to answer the question. And the story was itself so powerful that the students got the answer right away, and they got it right. And I think that is saying for us, we need to look for real life situations and teach through these situations, teach our people through these real life situations, just as Christ used the story. And use questions. Let them ask, or we ask questions. But then, in answering those questions, use the story that bring home the point so powerfully that they can't miss it. It's right there. It shows them how to apply it, because in the narrative there, Jesus was basically saying, if you see people and treat them as I treat them, then you would have gone over just like the Samaritan did, and tend to the man and take care of him. That's my 2 cents there, Elder.
Okay, and I know that I was asked to look at the question again. So our practice is that we refer to people as brothers and sisters. So if the person is of the same faith as us, we refer to them as brothers and sisters. But why not have every person, I'm thinking from the lesson, and I could be incorrect, that God wants us to see every person as a brother or a sister. And so we would not treat the people who do not go to the same denomination as us differently, but rather we would have an all-inclusive approach to how we work with, operate with individuals.
Yeah,
Come on,
that's a
class.
powerful application. Powerful application, Sister Joseph. That's right.
Okay, so here we are, Elder Joseph. I want to apologize for seeing your message late, but we're happy to have you join us. I saw that lesson as well. It's how we learn to cheat people. Many of us, I keep harping on that point, and I don't want to rub it in so much that persons think that I'm missing the point. But it's not about what we think we are or who we think we are or what we are not capable of doing as Christian and looking at the other person and saying, but recognizing that every person is valuable and loving every person. Some persons, they're moralists, and I say that all the time, but they don't know how to love people. And we treat people in all sorts of callous way. But when we realize that everyone is valuable in Christ's eyes, and they should be valuable in our eyes, it really makes a difference in our approach. And it is that approach that Jesus took with his ministry that draw people to him. It takes us back to the point that Sister Deloise makes, where she says, there are no dumb questions. Everybody can learn. You ask questions because you're uninformed, or you're unsure, and you want to learn. So there's no really dumb question. I may reach to a point where I have that knowledge, and so I don't need that question. But the question is to help to develop another person. And not only that person who's asking the question, the other persons who may be around. And so we should encourage questioning. Sometimes the way we teach, and I'm including myself because I'm a part of the leadership of the church, is that we let people feel that their contribution is irrelevant and insignificant. And sometimes maybe even go further to say, we let them believe that they're stupid.
Make a point here, please.
Before you go on, I mean, the sister before asked a question, or she made a statement, and she said she wasn't sure if she was correct, and you didn't comment on it. And the issue is about, I mean, we normally refer to individuals of the same faith as brothers and sisters. But the question is that correct? I mean, should we be referring to everyone or treating everyone the same? We didn't respond.
Can I respond here? Remember, all of us were created by God. We're all his children. So we have to treat every human being as our brothers and sisters by creation. But there's a text here I want you to look at. Galatians 6:10 says, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Does this text have anything to do with what we're saying here? And why it says especially and not including?
Okay. Elder, I saw you were trying to come in. If that's not the point you want to answer, I will answer the question. But the George question, was Sister Linda's application correct?
I did not hear her submission, so I wouldn't be able to comment on it.
Okay. So basically, what she was indicating, I would go a little far. I would support Sister Deluise on this particular topic, in that everyone they may not be our spiritual quote unquote, and that too we have to be cautious about, because fundamental belief as Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that there are other persons in denomination who are a part of the Church of God. And Matthew himself said it, they will come one day. The more truth is revealed to them, the more light is revealed to them. They will come, they will not reject the light if they're part of the household. But who gives us the determination to determine who of these persons are not a member? So we should esteem each person as we see them as a brother and a sister, someone valuable in the eyes of Jesus. And from that context, I'm speaking. Elder, go ahead.
Yeah.
George, sorry, before you come, Brother George, was that satisfying to you?
Well, no, it's not about satisfying. I mean, I just wanted to get an answer based on
okay, fair enough.
All right. I if I may, I want to draw us back, because like I told Brother Kim last week, I was anxiously waiting for this lesson to be discussed. The church and education. And if we try to focus, number one, if you look at the memory text where Paul is addressing the church, Paul as the pastor, Paul as the elder, and how he speaks to the church, and he said, when I come talking to you, when I come to see you, and when I think about you, I came and I was ministering among you just as a nursing mother. That's how I looked at you. That's how I cherish you, talking about the church. And he said, I am so happy for you. I am proud of you. I boast about you. That is all Paul talking about the church. The question is, what is the church? Sabbath Sunday gone, I had a program on ZJB, the radio station. I was discussing some of the fundamental beliefs of the church, and we dealt with the church and the remnant and all of that. And it was very instructive for us to remind ourselves exactly what the church is. This special people called out. It is God's family. That's the church. And as rightly said, that Jesus said about the church, look, this church is the apple of my eye. And anyone who touches this church touches me. That's the church. And if you remember what Sabbath tells you, that we talk about the church and education. What role is the church supposed to play in education? What kind of education? The academic or spiritual? And anyone who look at it, we have to focus on it that way. What is supposed to be the role of the church in education? Last week, we talked about education and redemption. And we said that education is to bring people back to understand God's character, just who God is. And redemption would have been to restore that image of God in people. And all of these are coming through the church. So when we look at this very important topic this week, we want us to look at it. The church and education. What is this lesson trying to say to us? What is supposed to be the role of the church in education? You saw here where it said the church is supposed to be that place that provides an atmosphere where people, a warm atmosphere, where people can learn and where people can see the love of God, can see him. But how do we do that? How do we as a church provide this atmosphere for learning? You spoke just now as I wind up this part of it about people asking questions. Listen to Dr. John Paulson, a noted one of our greatest professors at Loma Linda, and he said, he looks forward these times to Sabbath school, where he feels that he learns something. Because as you rightly said, nobody can influence what the preacher is going to talk about. You have no control over it. But in Sabbath school, you have control over it. And he said, what has happened now? What used to happen before, where people go to church and Sabbath school, is making the bold statement that nowadays people go to Sabbath school, they leave Sabbath school and go home, and they did not learn anything. And the same thing happens from time to time on Zoom. People come on the Zoom and they'll go off the Zoom and they don't learn anything. And the point that he made, which is quite true, that doesn't happen because nobody asks questions anymore. You remember Elder Edson when we were at church and Brother Jaime was around there, you know how it was the Sabbath school time discussion is lesson. And the person who presenting the lesson better be careful and better be prepared. So the question that was put out by these professors is, why is it that today people are not learning anything in Sabbath school? Why is it that today people are not asking questions anymore? And what can we do to bring about that atmosphere to stimulate questioning that people can learn?
Elder, I'm happy you touched that. My sister's going to talk. So go ahead, sis.
Yes, whoever is the teacher, because we had shifted from Sabbath school class to study groups. And whoever is the leader of that study group is to be the master of encouraging individuals to contribute. So rather than starting with a lecture, it should start with an open question. And if you're part of a group, the norms of the group should be established so that individuals know that it is a safe place, and not just telling them that they're safe, but the facilitator, for example, you know, sometimes you're in groups and how some people start to suck their teeth because they think that Brother George is asking too many questions or making too many points. The fact is, they have to appreciate, or we have to instill in individuals, when you have somebody who is asking the question, listen to the answer because you can go. And if it is not clear, you ask. And it also goes to what Sister Delary said, that we don't cut off people. And if somebody says something and it's not in the right syntax or the right English, that's not important. What is important is the participation and what the person is going to learn from the process. So the teacher has to set the tone for that.
Yes, but one of the things you stole one of the points that I was going to make is that whenever we went anywhere for Sabbath school, people would always say, I know those people come from dead ends. We were not afraid because we grew up in a culture in Dennis Church where people ask question, and so and get into the discussion and the flow. So whenever we went to St. John or any other church, we were not timid to get up and make contribution. No, that is kind of stepping back even before the sometimes as individuals who participate. The criticism, we're only human sometimes, and it gets to us. Where people say, why is he always jumping up? Elder as well, Brother Betty, why they jumping up? They think they don't know scripture, but they're not contributing. And the environment is created sometimes, even in this group, study group here, we encourage others, teachers from time to time, Elder George, Brother George, Brother Jonathan, whoever reach out to people, say, make a contribution. You cannot be in the class and you're not contributing. That's why we do it the way we do it. You have to be willing to contribute, not to come as a sponge to suck up everything. And sometimes you go away and you meet Brother George outside and say, you know, Elder Aswell was saying that in the class. I don't understand what he was saying now. The best place to have asked the question would have been in the class. Because there is the place, it's a safe place for learning. And as Sister Linda say, we as teachers have to make the student feel that here is a safe place for learning. And that's what the church should be. A place where people come to learn.
And if I may say something, Elder, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, right? The teacher or the facilitator is critical during the presentation because the teacher has to create that atmosphere so that all the students in the class can feel comfortable to participate. And even as you explained that one person may be doing most of the talking, or 2 or 3 persons may be doing most of the talking. And then you may find other members of the class might feel intimidated because they figure that they're not well learned in terms of the topic. And so they're fearful that the information that they're going to present might not be of good quality. And so, you know, they may appear being maybe not knowledgeable about what is really going on. So the teacher can ask direct question to a particular individual. And then the teacher ought to be mindful as to the type of question he or she is going to ask to that person. So you have to be knowledgeable enough of that individual. And when you pose a question in your mind that you think might not be challenging to that individual, so the person can feel comfortable answering the question. So you can even ask and preface, give a little idea so that they get a clear understanding as to what you're actually asking, right? So it is very important that the teacher, and so even though we talk about individuals getting up, I mean, I may say a lot on the Zoom. For me, when I'm in the church, sometimes I don't say much, but I find myself on the Zoom speaking a lot more. Is it because I'm just seeing individuals on the screen and they're not around me? So all these are things that we have to focus on. And so some persons may just be reluctant because they're not comfortable. So we have to create that atmosphere for them.
And I was going to make another point about teaching too. Sometimes there's a tendency to go from Sabbath to Friday in that sequence. And we have to liberalize and ask individuals at the outset, what, and something like your strategy that you use here, what is the point? What do you have to share with us from the lesson this week? And the teacher needs to know the lesson so that if Brother Parker point is from Friday's lesson, that they can say right away, thanks for bringing this to us from that particular section, because in that way, it helps to motivate the person that you are acknowledging and you're aware of. So it is our receptive style as well, and our knowledge of the lesson that is critical.
Elder Edson, let us look at something here. Remember, I'm going to keep drawing us back to we're talking about the church and education. Remember, on the Sabbath, it tells you that the earliest lessons, education, teaching was done through the auspices of the church. And even in secular times, we know that from the earliest time, education always took place under the auspices of the church. Remember Martin Luther, who was the monk? He was in his monastery. And there is where he spent all that time studying and learning and discovered enough information to write up those 95 theses on the church door. Remember, again, back in our own time, even in our time right there in Antigua, education was done under the auspices of the church. The Cedar Hall Moravian Church is where we all went. Spring Gardens was the place where that first college started. Cedar Hall played this great part in the education of the slave, and hence in 1834, when the slaves got their liberation, they got full freedom in Antigua because of the work of the church, educating the slave. And so we have to keep in mind, we're looking at that, the role that the church has to play in education, both academic and this whole matter of Christian education. We can boast of the fact that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has the largest healthcare system and the largest education system of any church in the world. And as someone says, we talk about Oxford and Yale and Harvard, which are the Ivy League schools. We know that Andrews University and Loma Linda could have been up there in this Ivy League status as we go about educating people. The reason why we are not there, as we learned, is that we focus on taking in even minorities, people who would not be able to pay to go to Harvard and Yale and things. And let me remind us about something here very quickly. Look at this lesson, this quarter's lesson, in a very great detail. I are going to find something very strange, as I pointed out to Bolans last week. All the lessons that went before, you can pick out who the main contributors are. Not this quarter. You don't know who wrote what. This lesson is prepared by a number of university presidents, college presidents. So we don't know who. And from that focus, that is why the lesson is going the way it is going. You know, I said last week that we have to note of this church and education. The Adventist church is facing a big challenge. In Britain, in California, in Iowa. In California, we're threatening to shut down those faith-based schools because they're saying they're not educating people to live in the real world. A study was done over 50,000 students where it proved when it comes to faith-based school, especially ours, our students was measuring 10 months ahead in academics among any other school that they tested. And they wanted to know what we were doing in our school, our church schools, to bring about that. And the answer that the person who did the study with the scientists, we took a world view where we look at others rather than ourselves, while other schools are looking at this altruistic kind of thing that they figure I am better than that. So unless you're a kinder person, you cannot go to this particular school. So as we look at this whole matter of the church in education, the church educating people, and we look at what Jesus was trying to teach that rich young ruler when he told him that story of the Good Samaritan. This was education. What was the education that Jesus was passing on to this rich young ruler? Remember, he was very educated and he did not really want to find out anything from Joseph. The Bible said what? He wanted to trap Jesus. And even when Jesus answered him by asking him another question, Sister Linda, we call about that, the inquiry method, the questioning method. That's the method that Jesus used with the woman at the well. That's the question he used with them. Always questioning people. With the rich young ruler, what is written in the law? How readest thou? He always questioned people. That is what we must get to. Pose the question, ask people questions, and encourage them to answer questions or ask questions also. So again, we're going to zero in this thing. As a church right now, we have a church school in Antigua. That motto is education for life. But the school is just struggling to stay alive. Is that right? Is that right? It is our church school. We are educating people. And if you focus on what's happening all the world, what is happening in the school system, we need to pay attention. What is wrong with our school? What is wrong with us as a church in educating our young people, in educating the world about Jesus?
Well, Elder, you asked what is wrong with the school, but what we have to understand though is that the school is a reflection of all the churches around us in Antigua and Barbuda. And so if we have challenges in the church, then obviously that is going to spill over in the school, because the same persons who are leaders in the church are leaders in the schools, right? So that is where we have to look. And that is why even here now, the author is saying that in our church, we have to create that atmosphere so that people can feel comfortable. And if we look on the Thursday, for example, when he talked about sharing our lives, it is said at the bottom that we must never forget that people are closely watching to see if our lives illustrate the message of grace that is found in the Bible. So they're watching us, they're listening to us, and they're also looking at our lives to see if what we are saying, what we are speaking is reflected in our lives. And if there is conflicting views, then we're going to have challenges there. So we have to start somewhere, and that is why we have to make sure that if we create that atmosphere within the churches, then it will be much easier when we get to the school, and maybe then the school would not be struggling the way we recognize that it is struggling.
Okay. Yeah, I got back in because I didn't hear most of the discussion that Elder Joseph was making, but going on from what Brother George has been saying, and I got the last bit of Elder Joseph, is two things. I'm going to go into the one that says we have to set the example. And one of the things I want to say, and I don't know, both of you are teachers, so you can tap in, you can enlighten me if I'm going wrong. But one of the things, when you went to school, be it a public school or whatever, in yesteryear, you look at your teacher as a paragon of virtue. It doesn't matter where they came from and how maybe they were living, where they were from. But the way they dressed and carried themselves in the classroom made you thought of them that they were fitting examples, and you held them in high regard. Now today, even within the church, and people are saying just is irrelevant. You know, and I find that as a part of education as well. Just can't be relevant. How we carry ourselves, Brother George says, morally and physically impacts people. And so somebody gets up, everybody wanted to have a little briefcase or a little bag carried because teacher as well took a briefcase to school. So you see people today, they carry themselves any old how going to the job. They carry themselves any old going to work because that's what they see modeled before them. And so, yes, that is true. But the lesson in this week's lesson, it says, we are supposed to be living disciples. And one of the things too, I want to said earlier before Elder Aswell came in before that out, is that in the old church, for example, we can look back and say, Labwood had some students. We can say Brother Edwards and Brother Liverpool and so forth had some students. They took time out, they spent time educating persons. They may not agree with everything they said. They may have gotten additional information and became sharper than these men who they learned from. But everybody could have said, these are the people who were, as it were, rabbi in the days. Old Papi Josiah and Daniel and Brother Noel, some John Hughes and these kind of people. These are the people, and people, they stood out to people. Are we playing that role in the church today as our part in the education of people within the church? Everybody's silent.
Can I say something there?
Yes.
I'm making a point and you correct me.
Mm.
You don't really have to be in a leadership position to have a student or students.
Thank you.
Because the Lord will allow someone to come to me for me to teach them. But I like what was said on the what day is this now? Give me a minute here. Call to live as light. My device is not moving. It says here, Christian education must. So if I have a student or students, then include teaching our students to be light in the world, to be able to make choices and decisions that
You're gone, Deloise.
Yeah. Okay, Elder, you know, I'm glad.
I'm hearing her from the
She's coming back?
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. You can hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah,
okay, go ahead. One thing, if I have a student or students that God, because as Christians, we must be able to influence people to come into our circle so we can tell them, because that's our role and responsibility as disciples, to make disciples of others. So when they come into my circle and I'm teaching them as a teacher teaches his student, I'm supposed to be teaching them to become light of the world, in the world, and make decisions that will reveal the reality and goodness of God to others. So I am teaching them as I am doing for them or with them to go and do likewise. So you don't have to be a leader in the church to be a teacher and have students. Thank you.
Elder Joe, may I make 2 points here?
Yeah.
So one of them is I'd like to go back to the definition of church, because I think quite often the way we define church affects the way we in turn respond to the teachings in the lesson. There is a sense in which when we talk of church, we tend to relate to that gathering of people on Saturday for that 4 hours. I think when the Bible talks about church, it speaks of church in the body of believers. So that you're a believer whether you're at church or you're a believer whether at your work, wherever you are, your life is about believing. In that sense, it casts a wider net for you in which to operate and to try to influence people to be like Jesus. The second point that I want to make is that remember the whole goal, the whole aim of the Christian education is to make people, teach people, help to teach people how to be Jesus's disciples. Now that presupposes that I myself am a disciple and I'm teaching and doing what Jesus did. And so I am becoming more like Jesus every day. And so then I am able to share and to impart that with others. It's very difficult to tell somebody, here's what a disciple of Jesus is like, if you are not experiencing what that is like. And that is why Paul would say, follow me as I follow Jesus Christ. And that's the pattern that we find. So it's important that even within the school, within the church, we are at home, wherever we're teaching, the great object is to make them disciples of Christ. And as we're seeing, Christ had two main ways of doing that. He taught and then he practiced, you know. And so it has to be. I mean, I give you a classic example of this thing here that was just being discussed. Last Sabbath, I rushed out of my house to get to church because we started at 11. I was running late. Turning past Valley Church, heading up there, I came upon a man lying on the side of the road, almost out in the road, Mazi, you know. And listen, I was late and I was rushing and I passed the man there and he was lying there. And by the time I got to about where we just now, just a little up by Harris, so you know where teacher Harris lives, the spirit said to me, boy, where you going? You can't go church. You passing the man like the priest, and some turn back, and go down and make sure the man come out the road. Suppose something run over your head. You understand? And so I turned the car around and went back. When I got there, somebody in a bus stood up there before me and was talking to him. So the two of us end up talking to him and tell him, get up from there and put him properly. And he went about his business. The point that I'm making is these stories that you see, the lessons that when we use these stories, and that's why Jesus was so powerful. The stories were real life stuff. They're right before you. And so a part of the church teaching is just us being obedient, just us living out what Christ says. And as we live it out, that too will have an influence on people.
Powerful stuff.
Look at
Elder, before you come in there, just
yeah, go ahead, Elder. Go ahead.
As if Elder Foster, I'm going to Foster wanted to make a point.
Beautiful.
Right. Yeah, so we're going to take him because I could let you wrap up. Yeah. Brother Foster? Okay, his mic is closed, so when he gets back around. Yeah, go ahead, Elder.
Yeah, let me piggyback on Elder Kim stuff, and let us remember to state, we talk about the church and education, and it's the church's duty to be involved in education. That is to teach people who God is, to present the character of God. And all of us, elders, Sabbath school teachers, superintendents, whatever position we have in the church, it is our responsibility to do that. Let's remember the statement that says, according to our 28 beliefs on the church, God has a church. God always has a church. But that church is a special people who are called out from the world. We can't forget this. Called out. That's what church is. You're called out. Remember, God said to Abraham, get up from where you are, leave your homeland and your family and go. You are going to begin my church. And then Israel went down to Egypt. And then in Exodus, God sent Moses, said, look, go call my church out of Israel. And that church, that it was a church that was going through the desert, the wilderness. That was the church. Remember Ruth down there in Moab, who never knew anything about God nor God's church. But she told her mother-in-law, look, where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. Your God will be my God. She went up there. Ruth got married to Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse, who had David, who had Jesus. That was the church. And we piggyback on that and come back now to the church in our day. God always has a church. It is the same church, which church? The church that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony or the faith of Jesus. That's the church. And that is our mission. Now, what is supposed to be our responsibility as this remnant church to carry on that education to people in the world? As Sister Derry picked on Monday, called to live as light. All of us within that Seventh-day Adventist church. When I was on the radio on Sunday, I made it plain. Being a Seventh-day Adventist is something that always sticks in my mind. If you're at school, it's sticking in your mind. You are PS. You remind yourself, first of all, you are Seventh-day Adventist, and then you are PS. But remember himself, he's a Seventh-day Adventist and then a manager. Wherever you are, if you're in school, you are Seventh-day Adventist and then a student. Because wherever you are called to educate people, to live as light. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. And no matter anything you do, Brother Elder, people don't know, but you know, be Adventist on your one. So anything Brother Leon does on the job, he gonna put. Why? Because you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you're a light, and you can't hide. You just say, don't put a light on the bowl or under the bed. You make it shine. So you say, let your light so shine. That's the message. I to get the education out to people, all of us. Let our light shine. That's the command we're given to us, and it must happen through the church.
Elder, you touch a point there that I stuck out to me. Who is that there? Oh, yes,
hello,
you ready?
Brother Harris here.
Okay, Brother Harris.
Yes. I would like to give a thought here. Now, what is God's purpose for the church today? He organized the church for a purpose. Now we are told that the promises that were given to ancient Israel that they failed of fulfilling, God will fulfill them to his church today. Right? His church is to receive or to fulfill those promises. Now, I would like to read two statements from the book Education, if you'll permit me. Right? Two statements from the book Education. I'm reading from page 84, paragraph 2, paragraph 3 over to page 385. Just bear with me. It says, in the training of his disciples, the Savior followed the system of education established at the beginning. The 12 first chosen, with a few others who through, just bear with me here. My eye is not so good. Just bear with me. Yeah. It says, the 12 first chosen, with a few others who through ministry to their needs were from time to time connected with them, formed the family of Jesus. They were with him in the house, at the table, in the closet, in the field. They accompanied him on his journeys, shared his trials and hardships, and as much as in them were entered into his work. Sometimes he taught them as they sat on the mountainside, sometimes beside the sea or from the fisherman's boat, sometimes as they walked by the way. Wherever he spoke to the multitude, the disciples formed the inner circle. They pressed close beside him, that they might lose nothing of his instruction. They were attentive listeners, eager to understand the truths. They were to teach in all lands and to all ages. The first pupils of Jesus were chosen from the ranks of the common people. They were humble, unlettered men. These fishers of Galilee, men unschooled in the learning and customs of the rabbis, but trained by the stern discipline of toil and hardship. They were men of native ability and of teachable spirit. men who could be instructed and molded for the Savior's work. In the common walk of life, there is many a toiler patiently treading the round of his daily task, unconscious of latent powers that, roused to action, would place them among the world's great leaders. Such were the men who were called by the Savior to be his collaborers. Just let me finish, please. And they had the advantage of 3 years training by the greatest educator that this world has ever known. And I would like to wrap up with a quote from page 57, page 57 of the book. And hear what it says. And this is paragraph 3. It says, the greatest want of the world is the want of men. Men who will not be bought or sold. Men who in their innermost souls are true and honest. Men who do not fear to call sin by its right name. Men whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole. Men who will stand for the right, though the heavens fall. And this is my contribution, brethren. I do pray that we all will meditate on these words, right? Taken from the book Education. Thank you very much. I will not say more.
Is this speaking?
We're going to go a little longer, just yes. Said you had contribution, Sister Joseph? Messiah? Okay.
No, it was something in the thing. I was going to follow up on a few persons' comment, because all of us in the church, no matter if we're just regular members or leaders, every one of us have come to the church because we have accepted Christ. So we are disciples of Christ. So the responsibility of education falls squarely on all of us. We'll be at different levels, but our story, what is very important, Jesus loved or used a lot of stories, and we can use the stories of what Christ has done for us as the hallmark of getting across to individuals. Because when we can testify of God's goodness to us, people will hear our story, hear us more than if we have no story to tell.
Okay, I just want to, if you permit me, on the Wednesday, Seeking Truth, and the quotation from Einstein, but I like how the author concluded that quotation. They says that we should never lose a holy curiosity. We should be curious about. They mention a few things that we need to know about. Why we're here, who are we, how should we live, why is there evil and suffering, and what happens when we die. We're supposed to want to know these biblical truths as God's people. We're supposed to be curious enough to know them and just not be able to just settle for what we know. We should want to go and know more and more and more about Christ. So that part I want us to just look at if we have the time. Seeking truth and holy curiosity. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna let them wrap up. I'm gonna give Elder Kim, Brother George, whoever wants, Elder Joseph, to wrap up. But my big question is, and you can do that with looking at Sister Joseph's question, is there any place in God's church, considering the topic of church and education, for dormancy, for retirement, and for relaxation? I'd use that word, dormancy, retirement or relaxation. Is there any place for that as a disciple in the church and education? Anybody want to take that up? That's where we're going to close this week, because as a disciple, we're supposed to be ever teaching, ever ministering, ever sharing. So is there a question? Some persons say, I've had enough.
I would just answer, and my simple answer is no. There is no space for retirement, dormancy, relaxation, whatever adjective we want to use. As long as we have life, there is hope, and we have to continue to carry out the work of the Lord until we are not in a position to do it anymore, and that is through death, when we have no breath in our body.
Well, I
Elder
agree in
Joseph.
general with Elder George's statement, but I do think that we have periods of transition where we may vary the method, or we may change the field in which we minister, but certainly until we die, we are in the school of being Christ's disciple. Interestingly, I've never seen anywhere in the Bible where any of God's men retired. Only when they were, only after they died, somebody else took their places, you know. So I think the pattern is firmly laid there for us. So quite rightly, Brother George.
You know, you look at Monday talking about living as a light, and Jesus was very specific. And someone asked, the conditions that existed then, the Roman government had ruled Jerusalem, had ruled Israel. They were in control. The disciples were anxiously waiting, like many others, for a deliverer to come. When Jesus came, they thought that Jesus was this political deliverer, hence James and John's mother's request to Jesus. They had a misconception of Jesus, and that is why from time to time, Jesus had to use a specific method of education to teach them a thing or two. So here's Jesus trying to say to the people, even if you live amidst that situation of the Romans, where from time to time they were there breathing down your neck, anyone who stepped over the line were hung on a cross, were crucified, were persecuted, even though they lived on a situation like that. Was it unfair for Jesus to say to his disciples, when he read, somebody called that Matthew chapter 5, the throne speech? Jesus was reading the throne speech from heaven. You are the light of the world. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. What is Jesus telling the disciples in the midst of that geopolitical situation where they are so fearful of the Romans? How could Jesus be telling his people, his church at that point in time, you are the light of the world. Therefore, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good work. Was Jesus unreasonable to his disciples on a situation like that? What do you mean, Jesus? We must shine our light. We can't do what you like because the Romans are around here. What do you mean? And Jesus is saying the same thing to us today as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are not really zeroing on the function. As somebody asked, what is the reason why, Brother Foster, God called the church? We're not really understanding our position and our call right now as Seventh-day Adventists and what is going to happen to us in the next couple of years. We are the light, and Jesus said, let your light so shine. Daniel and the three Hebrew boys in the midst of that situation, let their light shine. Mordecai shined down in Persia. All the people, everybody bowing down to Haman. Mordecai didn't. He said, no, I am bowing to nobody. Nehemiah and Ezra and David, they stood up and they let their light shine. Everybody running from Goliath. David stood up and said, you come to me with a sword and a spear. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, and I'm going to slay you and cut off your head and give your body to the beast. Everybody, what's going on here? David stood up and let his light shine. All of us are got to say the same thing. And I want to say that before I wrap this thing up. You never know where God can take you from to make your light shine in a kind of way. Here in Mansfield, I must say, I'm extremely happy for how God has been using me and doing things around here in Montserrat. And in the next 2 weeks, I am called to take over the leadership of the church. Mr. Sir said, wherever you go, you have to let people know who you are, what you are, and you can't put your light under a bushel. You have to shine it so that anywhere you are, people are supposed to see that you're different, a different manager, a different PS, a different whatever you are. That is a call made to us living as light. And in that particular sense, Edson, you will be educating people. Well, I can't do what you do because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I can't do so and so because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. Not a Christian. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And as we see that call, and we recognize that thing, that we are all called to educate people, to show them who God is. That is what is Christian education. And it is much different from indoctrination. Education is not indoctrination. We use indoctrination and we enslave people. But education sets the person free. It liberates you when you understand who God is and who God wants you to be. Jesus said, "Who do people say that I am?" Peter gave the right answer. "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus said, "Simon, blessed art thou. Flesh and blood didn't tell you. And upon this rock, the rock of your testimony, that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, I will build my church." That is Jesus' church, not the pastor's church, not the first elder church, Jesus' church. And that is from time to time, we must be aware of this thing. When we decide we're not going to do so and so, or we're not going to do so and so, you are not hurting Elder Edson. You are not hurting Pastor Gardner. You are hurting God, because this is God's church. And as he said, the gates of hell will never prevail against my church.
Just before I'm going to give Pastor Gardner the last word, Pastor Gardner, you will give the closing comments, because I know you wanted to make comments, but I just want to commend you, Elder Joe. I know you're well able, and we'll pray for you here as you lead out there in Montserrat. We know we ask and we'll be with you.
Thank you.
Elder Pastor Gardner, I said Elder Gardner. Dr. Gardner, yes.
Hi.
Yes, you wanted to make a comment on
I've been trying to get into a long as well, but
sorry, man, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with a point that was made by Brother George and Brother Tong, that we never stop learning. We always learn, even though we transition from active to probably inactive or voluntary. We're still encouraged to learn, because as long as we have life, there's always something for us to learn. And we can even voluntarily help others. And to voluntarily help others, we need to keep sharpening our own tools, And so they told us, when you're getting older, you need to do some brain work. And, and I like to keep my mind sharp by use a lot of word puzzle, a lot of word search, and so on, so that it keeps you alert. And interestingly, some of these have different meanings to them. They're not just word shut, but the word come up with a meaning, so you learn something from it. So we never stop learning. And that is going to be the theme for eternity, where we're told that we will enter a university for which we never graduate. So there's always room for learning. But as Brother Kem said, we transition. And those who retire, they retire from active service in whatever field they were for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But they will continue to do things in different areas, because there's always scope for you to learn. You never stop learning. You're always learning. And so education is for life. And that's why we educate people not only for this life, but for the life to come. So I trust and pray that our educating of ourselves and our people and the church is not just for this present moment, but for the year after, where we'll enter into school from which we never graduate, because we're ever learning and still learning, because there's so much for us to learn.